Okay,
Assalamu
good.
alaikum. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Good morning, ladies, gentlemen, brothers, and sisters. My name is Ghulam and Mir. I'm president of the World Kashmir Awareness Forum. Thank you all for joining us today on this Human Rights Day webinar. I thank the great panelists of speakers who will shed light on the state of human rights around the world, particularly in Kashmir. December 10, as you know, is celebrated around the world as the Human Rights Day. It goes back to 1948 when the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Universal Human Rights Declaration. The first country that celebrated it was South Africa in 1960, on March 21st, 1960, when they had the infamous Sharpeville massacre in which 69 Black Africans were killed by minority white apartheid regime. Since then, it's been celebrated on this day, on 10th of December, everywhere else in the world. I just would like to tell you that on this sobering day, that India is, in my opinion, and I'm sure in the opinion of many, the graveyard of human rights. This graveyard does not recognize just basic human rights. It does not recognize Kashmiri life at all. Started in 1931 with the mass genocide in Punch and Jammu in 1947. The time of the genocide in Jammu and Punch makes me think of the Walking Dead horror scenes when 250,000 people in Jammu were wiped out and 500,000 people had to walk into almost in from Jammu and Kashmir, and many of them reached what's called Sialkot, Pakistan now. Since 1990, multiple genocides took place for the entire decade of 90s. The traditional human rights that are the right to life, liberty, for food, safety, those don't even exist in Kashmir anymore. And Khurram Parvez was the last example of how voices are not accepted, voices of freedom and voices of human rights. It is important that we in the diaspora speak up, not only for human rights, but for the very basic physical existence in Kashmir and elsewhere in the world. Today, we'll be having a wonderful panel. I just wanted to give you a small description of the World Kashmir Awareness Forum. World Kashmir Awareness Forum is a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Washington, focusing on providing information on the conflict in Kashmir and advocating for Kashmiris in the region and throughout the diaspora. It aggregates and produces and amplifies the organizations that the human rights issues, as well as political and religious rights in Kashmir. It's an advocacy organization I'd like to thank ICNA Council for Social Justice for hosting today's webinar on their social channel. I thank the panelists for joining and sharing their experiences and expertise. Please do visit kashmirawareness.org. In the beginning and end of the webinar, we do have several platforms that speak to the issues in Kashmir. You can use the Facebook, Twitter, and also we do have other social media there. So please keep following us, and you'll know more about things that are happening in Kashmir. I would like to now start with the speakers. Our first speaker, Dr. Muhammad Musa Budak from Turkey, who is the international relations expert, was not able to attend. He got sick yesterday, and today he is in the hospital. But we will hopefully have Mr. Yilmaz Balsin, who may speak to us as soon as he is available. He is a general coordinator of ISAM, which is an economic and social research center in Ankara, Turkey. We'll also have Mirza Saib Beg, Dr. Farhan Chak, Nasir Qadri as the speakers. So we'll also have Dr. Emthiaz Khan, who will give us a ground report on Kashmir from his personal visit recently. So is Yilmaz Balsin around? He just had let us know that he would join us, and I would then at this time call Dr. Emthiaz Khan from George Washington University, where he is a professor of microbiology. So he is from the Kashmir Valley, and I would like to, he's also a board member of the World Kashmir Awareness Forum. Let's start with him.
I don't believe he's here. He's not here.
We have Dr. Farhan Chak here. I think he has things to do, and he was kind enough to change his schedule. And he is going to speak next to as the first speaker. Dr. Farhan Chak is an associate professor of international relations at the Qatar University. He also is Secretary General of the dynamic Kashmir Civitas Human Rights Organization. He is ancestrally Kashmiri, and I'm sure of all the people he will relate to the genocides that took place in Kashmir in 1947. Dr. Farhan Chak, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining.
Dr. Farhan, please unmute your mic.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ghulam Nabi Mir, for those kind, thoughtful words. It's always a pleasure to be with you and with your esteemed panelists, in particular Mirza Beg, who is a specialist in this particular field. So I welcome you all, and I appreciate this effort that you're making, Dr. Mir. It's an effort that all of us have to make, especially now with the situation so dire. So what I wanted to kind of talk about today, and what I wanted to what I feel is so fundamentally important. No matter what aspect of the occupation that we're talking about, no matter what legal means, and I would rather call them tricks that India utilizes to put this veneer of civility over their occupation, I think it's of fundamental importance that we challenge the entire framing of the Kashmir crisis and push back in the ways and means and consider the ways and means that so many of us maybe subconsciously be complicit in perpetuating occupation. And fundamentally, that's what we're talking about. There can be no freedom in occupation. There can be no law in occupation. And in occupation, the real free man, woman, or child is the one that's in prison because of the entire apparatus that is used to subjugate the Kashmiri people, their identity, their history, their language. And I've always been myself on the borders, being born and raised in Canada, being a part, as you know, Dr. Mir, of that exodus of the Kashmiris that were pushed out of Jammu and the surviving Kashmiris that ended up in Sialkot. And then from there, all over the world. So I had the opportunity to kind of listen and grow and hear multiple stories and narratives across these borders and listen to how those experiences and how those ideas of what it means, what Kashmir means to them, and kind of find those commonalities, but also recognize there are the significant differences that exist in the ways that narratives have formed. And particularly what India has done, it has tried to completely annihilate a sense of solidarity between the Kashmiri people, not just within occupied Kashmir, but also across from the various Kashmiri communities that live not just in Pakistan, but in Azad Kashmir or elsewhere. So the way that we need to constantly remember that, yes, the use of the many laws, in particular the Public Safety Act or the Disturbed Air Act or the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, which has recently been used to arrest Khurram Parvez, or the NSA or the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. And I'm sure, Mirza will give you so much more of the specific legal nitty gritty. But all of this are just different ways and means and tools that the occupational Indian forces use to perpetuate militarized occupation and a deep heightened level of colonization. So this really needs to be put in front of the world in unequivocal terms. This is an anti-colonial movement. We may be one of the last places on the planet that is enduring this vicious form of colonization of the language, of the culture, of the identity on several levels. So I wanted to bring that forward first, that yes, we recognize that this is what India uses, what Amnesty International has referred to in specific to the PSA as a lawless law. But all the major human rights organizations, not just Amnesty, but Human Rights Watch, and even the UN reports, right, both of them, 2018, 2019, unequivocally talk about the abuse. And especially after the arrest of Khurram Parvez, this has been all over the world, from The Guardian to The Washington Post, CNN, everyone has covered it. And it's absolutely understood that India is abusing so-called laws that they pass. But I'd like to take a step back and then kind of always, at every moment that we can, re-emphasize that, hold on a second here. It's not just the law they're breaking lives. It's not just these manipulation of these terms. All of it is false. The entirety and the entire frame of Indian existence in Kashmir is false and challenged. Of course, the Hindutva fascist regime has taken a very interesting strategy of acceleration, this heightened bravado, and fear-mongering to a level, of course, after Article 370 and 35A were abrogated, at levels that were never known before. And I think the statistics, if I can remember correctly, almost more than 10,000 people have been arrested just under the UAPA law. But nonetheless, we recognize all of this, but still, I think it's fundamentally important to reiterate and kind of always remind people that this is a colonization, this is a heavy militarized occupation and ongoing genocide. And I don't take this whimsically. You know, there is in academia a struggle, you can say, almost a type of a jealous guarding of the term genocide because of its association with the 1940s and the Holocaust. So there is a certain segment of academia that wishes to kind of protect the terminology and keep it only in one specific area. But Professor Gregory Stanton, was working with a young Kashmiri academic, Beenish Ahmed, who presented this brilliant kind of explication of the 10 steps of genocide as they are seeming to apply within the disputed territory of Jammu and Kashmir. And this is not just the first time. You know, and rather than go through all the different steps, right, just to kind of put it out there, it begins with this unforgiving binary. And that's what we're living in right now, that unforgiving binary that Hindutva fascism is pushing. That's the first level of genocide, classification. And then it moves on to symbolization, but not just forcing symbols on people, it's erasing them. And I'm sure all of the esteemed panel remember the attempts of the Indian occupation forces when they wanted to try to ban the wearing of traditional Kashmiri clothing. Now, imagine the level of fear that the occupation forces have, but it's not just fear, it's the hatred they have for everything that they know Kashmir is and they know is not Indian. And onwards from the symbolization and the discrimination and the dehumanization, it ultimately comes to organization. And just approximately, I think it was about 6 months ago, a BJP leader in Jammu, you know, in the most grotesque fashion, reminded the people that don't forget Jammu. And as you remember, you know, Dr. Mir had mentioned this openly, and that's the story of my family. That this is what happened to my grandparents, rather, being pushed out, and the surviving members of my family having to relocate to Sialkot. And the range between the amount of people killed ranges from 237,000, which is the largely used number, but it can go all the way up to 500,000 people. And that also was quoted by Dr. Ian Stevens, right? So this is a level of genocide that has not effectively or adequately been promoted or talked about. And we need to change that, because the threat was given recently that it's going to happen again. And that can't be taken lightly. And it's for that reason that Dr. Beenish and Professor Stanton got together and issued not one, but 2 genocide alerts for the disputed territory. So what we are seeing now is what he would classify as the 6th and 7th stage, the polarization, the heightened polarization, which tries to erase any type of pluralistic and tolerant vision, and then preparation stage, which the BJP leader effectively alluded to, and which Kashmiris are intuitively aware of with all the RSS fanatics that have been flying in droves under all kind of, you know, dubious security classifications to the areas around the valley and supporting the military too in various, you know, unclear ways. So what's left then are the final stages, which is then persecution, extermination, and then the denial. The denial that happened in Jammu should be a perfect example. The denial that's happening even in Bosnia with Srebrenica, which has led to this constitutional crisis because the Bosnians are refusing to allow genocide denial to gain a footground. So, you know, it's very important for us on this day, but in whatever forum that we do kind of bring forward the issue of Kashmir, is whatever way we're talking about it, whether it's legal or political or economic or cultural, that the entire frame reminds the audience that this is colonized area, heavy militarization, and anyone who sees what's happening now with this attempts at the delimitation and the removal of all Kashmiris from positions of power throughout the valley, it's clear what the intent is. So we need to be ready. We need to do what we can. For many of us who are outside, of course, we're limited in what we can do, but we need to make the best out of the hand that we're dealt with and raise awareness on these issues. And you know, thank you very much, Dr. Mir, for giving me this time. But I just wanted to kind of put those thoughts out there for everybody and share them with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Farhan Chuck. It's very sobering what happened to our nation, which has grown from 4 million people that we were back when I was in school, and to about 15 to 16 million people, and many of us scattered throughout the world, running for lives sometimes, at other times looking for opportunity. And you are a perfect example of somebody that faced adversity and fled all across the continents, and now you are speaking for your own people in your own language with your own experience behind it. Thank you so much, and thank you because you got to go. If you can stay for the Q&A, that'll be great. If not, we understand because you got something serious to take care of.
Yes.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Your pleasure. Thank you. Now we would go to Mirza Saib Beg. Also, he has another appointment, and so we'll have to move on to his discussion. And as you know, Mirza Saib Beg is a lawyer who was born and raised in Kashmir, then went to law school in southern city of Hyderabad in India, and he then came to the Oxford University, where he was where did his LLM or the master's, so to say, in law. He was a co-Phelan, Mansfield, and Oxford Weidenfeld Hoffman Scholar at the Benedict School of Government in the University of Oxford. After finishing that, he is now doing his PhD, and he is also working, at the same time in the arena of the foreign investment securities, I would believe. I know a little bit of that, but he is a brilliant speaker and has been on many of these platforms. And he comes from a family that has done a lot for Kashmiris in Kashmir during the past 75 years, 76 years, from the struggle for freedom to today. But in his own personal right, he is, as you can see, one of the most brilliant lawyers of Kashmiris who, like Professor Chuck, Dr. Chuck, has come to the West and is speaking up for his people. So with that, Mirza Saib Beg, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can my screen be shared now? Yes. Okay, I hope I'm audible. Just before I start, just a quick minor correction that I did a master's in public policy at Oxford, and I've not yet started my PhD. I'm still working on the funding, but I hope to start soon a part-time PhD, inshallah. But over the next 14 minutes, I will briefly discuss the topic of today's panel, which is on the UAPA, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, and I'll discuss the structure of the legislation and how it works, the state of exception in which Kashmir has been placed, the experience of Kashmiris, and the banning of social and political organizations that is taking place in Kashmir. If I have time, I will try to address two more points. The first is on the assumption of legality of law, as Dr. Farhan was also mentioning earlier, that by Indians, as well as in some cases by international audiences, there is an assumption that the law is legal. And much of what happens in Kashmir is right because it has been approved by a court. But if you look at the past, what happens in Kashmir, there are two things that are taking place, two channels of oppression that take place. One is which happens through legal means, which is that it is institutionalized through a court, there is a law, and there's also a different channel of oppression which is not on record, for which no orders are passed. We have minors being arrested, people being under house arrest, detention, people being incarcerated without any orders being passed. So even beyond the scope of the letter of the law, there is oppression taking place. But for today's discussion, we are limiting because the topic is on the UAPA, which discusses a particular legislation. So we're looking at what is the oppression which is sanctioned by law, which is approved by law within by the Indian government. So when talking about Kashmir, it's very important to highlight the distinction between rule of law and rule by law, because oppression can be wielded very effectively when you segregate the application of law, such as in apartheid South Africa, which is the slide that I've shared over here, that all of this was legal in apartheid South Africa as well. It has been approved. And the other way of oppression through law is when you selectively apply the law. So if the law is supposed to be the same for everyone, but you selectively pick certain people or certain groups of people and you apply them. Or the third route, which is entirely extrajudicial. And in Kashmir, we see all three routes operating. I'll quickly touch upon the UAPA now, which is under discussion over here. And I want to point out that for anyone who's Kashmiri over here, we do not need to tell them exactly what's happening in Kashmir. They know this is our life, this is what we experience. But the slides and the discussion is more intended for an international audience, which might not be well acquainted with what is happening in Kashmir. And therefore, I thought maybe the slides would be easier to follow data points and the discussion. Under the UAPA, the first thing to understand is that the process itself is a punishment. In any law in the world, it is not the process of the law which is punishing, but conviction. So when you are convicted of a crime, you can be punished. This is the basic standard of law, of rule of law anywhere in the world. But under UAPA, it is not conviction which is punishment. It is the process of application itself. The mere accusation on any person under the UAPA is sufficient to punish them because the law is so drastically worded. Now, in the last 3 decades, data has indicated that 75% of the people who have been charged with UAPA, they have been acquitted. So it would seem like the legal machinery is doing its job, because if people are being acquitted and some people have been convicted, then maybe the courts are doing their job. But what actually ends up happening is that even for those acquittals, it takes many, many years for people, and they stay in jail without any compensation being provided if they are acquitted tomorrow. So under the UAPA, there is no compensation provided for illegal detention, nor is the police charged with anything for their recklessness in charging a person under the UAPA. Under normal criminal law, you can always apply for anticipatory bail. If you have a fear of being arrested, you can apply for bail. But under UAPA, bail is not possible. And a person can be kept in jail for up to 180 days without charge. So for 180 days, you don't even need to be informed of the grounds of your arrest. And finally, the court relies on the police diary for giving bail. The police diary is just the police's version of events. It is not factually accurate. It has to be tested in court. But under UAPA, the police can rely on the court can rely on the police diary itself to deny bail. So there is an absence of a clear, foreseeable, precise law, which is stressed under international principles. So that for any law, it needs to be clear, it needs to be foreseeable. What is the action? What kind of action lands me into trouble? What is going to cause a sanction of the law against me? But there is no explanation under the UAPA. There's no explanation in which the Indian state may interfere with the rights of people. There are no safeguards and no remedies in place. And therefore, the result of the UAPA is just a chilling effect where people self-censor. And in recent times, we have seen the arbitrary use of this power, which is not found in any law on record. And most importantly, the UAPA fails the test of legitimacy. Since the object of any limitation by the law, it must be a pressing need. But under the UAPA, the object is vague, it is unspecified. So in practice, the objective appears to be intimidation, blackmail, or harassment, which cannot be a legitimate objective for any law. I quickly wanted to discuss the timeline of detention in India. And I think it's very important because it's important to highlight that it's not just the UAPA which is an issue. It is an entire structure of overarching laws which have been consistent for the last 100 years. There have been detention laws in India for the last 100 years which have been continuing in different shapes and forms. So very, very briefly, I'm trying to summarize quite a lot over here and for a non-legal audience. So I might be skipping some things, but very briefly, you see the detention law in India, it originates from a colonial legislation. In 1915, from 1915 to 1919, during the First World War, the Defense of India Act had been passed, which gave heightened power to the British government to detain people because it was a time of emergency. It was a war. Once the war ended, this law lapsed, but the same powers were transferred to a new legislation, which was called the Anarchical and Revolutionary Practices Act of 1919. Popularly in India's independence struggle, this act is known as the Rollat Act. And under this act, people could be detained for 2 years in detention. And when the protests were launched against the Rollat Act, something that I found very interesting was that one of the most popular protest slogans was that against the Rollat Act was that this act is no dalil, no wakil, no appeal, which means that there's no questions asked, you don't have any lawyers, and there's no appeal possible. And it is very similar to the way PSA and UAPA act today as well. And because this is the foundation, this is the framework for current day detention laws. After that, we had seen the Defense of India Act of 1939. So the Defense of India Act came back a second time during the Second World War. And usually you see that all these laws which seem to give emergency powers to the state, they get continued in one shape or form later as well, even when the emergency is over. Post India's independence in 1947, despite the fact that India's own freedom fighters have gone through detention laws, they've been through illegal detention, they retained the power of detention in their constitution. So the Indian constitution, in the chapter on fundamental rights, permits preventive detention. Even if there is no ground, even if you are not done any action, you will be, the preventive detention is basically anticipating that you are going to do something and therefore we'll prevent you. So there was a law which was passed in 1951, the Preventive Detention Law, which was later withdrawn in 1969. But there are a plethora of laws which have come and gone, which shows that the state's intent is always to maintain this power on detaining people. We have seen MISA in 1971, which was later withdrawn in 1980. It was heavily used by Indira Gandhi during the emergency which she had imposed. Then UAPA, which came out in 1967 in the aftermath of India and China's brief aggression. And that time, the main objective of the UAPA was to ban organizations. But not just in Kashmir. It is interesting that at that time, even DMK, which is a party in South, a political party in South India, they had wanted Tamil Nadu to secede from India. So even DMK, this was going on in the minds of the legislators that they need a law under which they could ban organizations. And after UAPA is still in power as it is being deployed heavily everywhere, but it has been amended from time to time to make it more draconian and more fierce. But in the meantime, we also saw TADA in 1985, which was supposed to be withdrawn within a year or two, but it was withdrawn finally in 1995. And today, even though TADA has been withdrawn, there are people still in jail under TADA cases who are still suffering for a law which has already been withdrawn. Then we had POTO in 2002. It was an ordinance which had been passed and which later became an act, POTA, in 2003, but that was withdrawn in 2004. So basically what I'm trying to say is that in one shape or form, and I've not even gone into the state legislations, because in many states in India, as well as in Kashmir itself, there's a Public Safety Act, there's Armed Forces Special Powers Act. There's a huge network of oppression which is channelized through these legislations. So this is just to give you a quick overview of what is happening. Now, I feel that you see, the state has a policy on incarceration. It is using incarceration as a tool of governance. And arbitrary incarceration is not just a tool of exemplary punishment, but it is indispensable part of state governance in Kashmir. Because without this detention, there will be free circulation of ideas, of people, of movement, and the state does not want that. Now, data which has been recently released by the Indian government, which was accessed by 2 Kashmiri law students using the Right to Information Act. It revealed that 91% of the people in the jails of Jammu and Kashmir are under trial prisoners. Now, what this means is that merely 9% of the prison population is guilty and convicted. So of all the people, who are in jail, and especially if you highlight the people who are in prison for militancy-related cases, the RTI, the Right to Information Act report, it suggests that merely 14 people have been convicted till date. The rate of conviction is less than 1.8%. So it indicates that this prolonged incarceration is used by the state as a tool to detain people without any charge, and there is no conviction also. And detainees under various laws, such as the Public Safety Act, they are not allowed to be represented by lawyers before an administrative panel. The legal representation can be made through appeal later in a court. But as on March of this year, there are over 200,000 civil and criminal cases pending before the High Court in Jammu and Kashmir. So it takes several months for a case to even get listed before the court for a hearing. And most glaringly, if you look at just 2019, there were 500 habeas corpus petitions which were filed before the High Court, and the court passed orders only in 5% of them. So it indicates that the court machinery, which the state already knows is overburdened, it cannot handle these cases, and in some situations, it does not want to handle these cases also. Kashmir is in a state of indefinite emergency because that is the way it can be governed by the Indian state. There is no other way the Indian state can govern over there. And this is a rule through oppression. So laws like AFSPA, PSA, UAPA, they have gone on for decades. It indicates that constitutional exceptionalism, which is directly aimed at suspending the rights of Kashmiris, have become a part of everyday life. And this is essentially what we have seen for our entire lives. In 2019, the Home Ministry's own data indicates that they had 8,000 detentions. These were detentions which were most of them were preventive detentions, and there were also 140 minors, which the Supreme Court, they released a finding that there were 140 minors in these detentions. But then the Supreme Court delegated the responsibility of identifying what is going on with the minors to the Jammu and Kashmir High Court. And the High Court came back and said that there are no minors under detention over there. And we have in Kashmir plenty of examples of various kinds of detention taking place. Detention which takes place completely off the record, or detention of political prisoners. So you have people like Qasim Fakhtu, who's been in jail under TADA, the law that I told you which was repealed. He has been in jail now for 27 years. And under TADA, confession which was given to a police officer was also held to be legal. And nowhere in the world will you see confessions given to police officers being legal, because these confessions can be obtained under duress or under torture. So they have questionable admissibility before a court. So in fact, if you look at Yasin Malik's case also right now, he is being charged with an action which has supposedly taken place 30 years ago, 3 decades ago. So there are many examples of the experience of Kashmiris on how these laws are very arbitrarily being used. And a few examples which I can very quickly provide are, number one, how UAPA was invoked against social media users in the aftermath of 2019. Because the Indian government, after banning the internet in Kashmir for many months, they allowed access to just 300 websites on 2G speed. And it was very ironical that they gave access to Netflix and Amazon Prime when Kashmir barely had a functioning 2G speed connection. But in any case, at that time, some people tried to use VPNs, virtual private networks, to access the internet. And the Indian government passed a blanket order that anyone who's accessing social media through VPNs is going to be charged with an anti-terrorism legislation. So in this case, it did not even matter if you access the internet to do an illegal activity, such as maybe some what would be classified as a terrorist activity, or whether you access the internet just to share your views, just to share your opinion, which includes legitimate criticism of what is happening, or even to highlight human rights violations, or even to espouse a particular political ideology. It does not matter. Any access to social media was deemed to be under the purview of an anti-terrorism legislation. The second example that I can highlight is on cricket. UAPA has been imposed on people for not just playing, but also celebrating teams' victories in cricket. One example is of Sayyid Tajammul, who was the 24-year-old brother of Sayyid Ruban. Ruban had been killed in 2018 when he was alive. He had been a cricketer of some repute in his village. So his friends and his brother, they gathered together to play a game of cricket in his memory. And all these people who had come there, gathered there, they'd all been charged under the UAPA. And the same thing also was seen most recently when Kashmiris cheered and they celebrated Pakistan's win in cricket. And and there's nowhere in the world where you will see cheering for a particular team being worthy of an anti-terrorism legislation. But this is how the UAPA is used and deployed in Kashmir without any application of mind, because it is not intended to be used as a legitimate source of law. It is intended to be used for harassment, for intimidation, so that people self-censor, so that people don't talk about things that the state does not want them to talk about. But then the state also has other tools in its arsenal, such as sedition law, which is also being deployed everywhere. And often there is most Indians, and even in the international audience, it assumes that the situation was not bad under previous governments in India, and it has only become bad under Modi, which is entirely false. I mean, even if you look at the government of Manmohan Singh, he has used the law of sedition. That government has used the law of sedition thousands of times against people. There are tremendous number of cases under his government also, and under Modi's government as well. So these laws, right from 1914, you see a consistency in all laws of detention, which have been retained by the state to hold on to power. I'll quickly move on towards the end of the last argument that I had to make over here, which is on the banning of social and political organizations. I'll skip a few slides because we can come back to them in the question and answer session later. But I think this is the most important thing I had to say, which is on the banning of Jamaat and JKLF under the UAPA. You see, UAPA has been used to ban many organizations. For example, SIMI, which is the Students' Islamic Movement of India, that was also banned under the UAPA. But it's not just the banning of the organization which is the most draconian aspect of it. Once an organization gets banned, then any pamphlet, any material that is related to that organization can be used to charge other people also. So if you are found in possession of pamphlets of the Jamaat or the JKLF, it could be used to suggest that you are a member of those organizations, and therefore you are liable to be investigated against under the UAPA. In the case of SIMI, when people, because see, no one can establish if you are a member of an organization, because very rarely do people actually sign a document and say that from henceforth I'm going to be a member of your organization. So usually what the police does is they rely on evidence found in people's homes, books, reading material, pamphlets, maybe some documents to suggest that you have links with those organizations. One example I can give you is of Jason C. Cooper. He was a human rights activist who had been charged with the UAPA. This was in 2015, quite recently. And the only evidence against him was that the police had found a book in his home which was titled Why Maoism. Now, whether Maoism is a good ideology or an inappropriate ideology is a different debate, but to charge someone with terrorism under an anti-terror legislation just because you found a book in their home is ridiculous. So the fear is that these kind of tactics can be used in Kashmir also. And despite the fact that India's own courts have already given various judgments which say that espousing a particular thought is not illegal, espousing a particular ideology is not illegal, and it's not illegal to have any divergent thoughts. But even if you look at it from a basic principle of human rights, it is a basic human right to think in terms of human aspirations. That is not a freedom which the state gives to people. It is a freedom which we have, which is ingrained in the human mind and soul. So the police, the state, they cannot detain people merely because they have thoughts which the state does not like. So in conclusion, what I'd like to say is that these laws are destroying lives in a most arbitrary, in a most discretionary manner, and we need to continue to exert pressure by documenting and emphasizing how these laws prevent the truth coming out from Kashmir. That timeline of laws which I showed before you, there's a reason why each law got it either lapsed or repealed. And the reason is that there was tremendous public pressure. The same thing needs to be done. And of course, merely repealing of UAPA does not end the crisis in Kashmir. It does not end the conflict. The conflict ends through self-determination and when people are allowed to express their political will freely. But stopping short of that, since this is a discussion just about the UAPA, the solution that I can propose is continuous engagement with international groups, continuous engagement with mobilizing on the ground to show that this law has completely destroyed lives and it has to be repealed. I'll look forward to any questions that there are, and I hope I've stuck to the time limit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mirza Saibek. Great presentation. And I think the message is, it's a great message that without pressure, public pressure outside Kashmir, particularly in the West, nothing is going to change and Kashmiris are going to keep suffering. So we'll have further discussion on that, and then we'll move on to presentation by Yilmaz Balsin. I understand he's here, is going to be representing Dr. Muhammad Musa Budak from Turkey. who is associate professor in the Gaziantep University, and Yilmaz Balsin, as I said earlier, is the coordinator of the ISAM movement, that's Economic Social Research Center in Turkey. And I met him about 3 years ago in Istanbul during a conference. He was so very useful to the organizers of that conference, which was co-sponsored by WKA, but more particularly by the Kashmir Civitas. So, Yilmaz, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Okay, my voice is okay. Do you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Dear brothers and sisters, I would like to thank you very much. First of all, for Kashmir Awareness Forum President. Yes, I remember it was very good meeting 3 years ago. I hope, inshallah, may Allah give us a chance. This corona issue will finish, then we meet again, inshallah. I am very happy to be with you. Now, Mr. Dr. Musa Budak, normally he was supposed to be here with you, but a little bit he is sick, hospitalized. Then, for that reason, on behalf of him and on behalf of our ESAM Economic Social Research Center and Milli Görüş movement from Turkey, we are fully supporting the Kashmir Dawa issue with our brothers, and we are following everywhere about the Kashmir meeting and organization. I would like to thank you very much again, all these Kashmir Awareness Forum managers and supporters and participants here. Thank you very much, especially Dr. Fai and Mir, our president. I am very happy to be with you. I would like to say, after my thankful for inviting me to this on subject of Kashmir, at the outset, let me make one fundamental point that our efforts should be to persuade the world powers, including the United Nations, to urge both India and Pakistan to include the people of Kashmir in the negotiations to peacefully resolve the dispute over Kashmir. When we talk of Kashmir, we talk of the sentiments and enormous sacrifices made by Kashmiri people during the past 74 years for a case dear to all its people. Dear brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, the subject of Kashmir is so dear not only to the hearts of 23 million of people Kashmiri, but also as a matter Muslim Ummah at very large. We here in Turkey, we do consider the pain and suffering of our brethren in Kashmir in our own. Here I give some examples, especially our big spiritual leader, the president of ESAM, Ustad Recai Kutan. Now his age is 92. He is, Alhamdulillah, managing the ESAM, and he was before former president of Saadet Party, who was the keynote speaker at the first International Kashmir Conference in Washington in 1991 with Dr. Fai and our president. This conference was organized by your organization. Every year, Ustad Recai Kutan said on our 5 February annual Kashmiri meetings, the persecution inflicted by India in Kashmir in defense of international law must be stopped immediately. Unilateral arrangements to change the demographic structures of the region should be cancelled without any delay. A free, fair, and impartial plebiscite agreed by the United Nations Security Council, where the people of Kashmir can demonstrate their will, should be implemented without wasting any more time. We, especially I summarized some notes from Dr. Musa Budak's notes. Alhamdulillah, yani in Turkey, especially in our international Muslim communities, every year we are focusing on Kashmir issue. How can we take an international agenda and to be solve the problems? How can we organize and make pressure, especially at the level of United Nations or European councils, as a freedom of rights? We should give our brothers Kashmir because they have a problem, the basic problems they face to face, how they survive their life. We are discussing in here Turkey, and we are suffering what they have in Kashmir. For these reasons, just I want to be say we with you, inshallah, all times, and we will support the Kashmir Dawa issue until they solve the problems, until the very useful or very peaceful places. Then Kashmir public, inshallah, Kashmir people will win their rights as soon as possible, especially in the Gulf countries, in the Muslim communities, Muslim countries should make on pressure India and to give the rights of our Kashmiri brothers in that region. So I would like to thank you very much again, and I will finish my speech here. I am very happy to be with you. I hope, inshallah, as soon as possible again, we will organize an international Kashmir conference in Istanbul, Turkey. Then we meet again, and inshallah, in the next decade, as soon as possible, we meet in Freedom Kashmir, inshallah. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I am very happy. I am so sorry because Dr. Musa Budak, he has a sick, some health problems. For that reason, suddenly I took an information from him, and thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you, Brother Yilmaz Balsin. Well, on our behalf, I would like to say prayers for speedy recovery of Dr. Bodak, and please pass our message to him, please. And also, you mentioned about Mr. Kutan. He was the head of the Human Rights Council at that time in Turkey in 1991. And I vividly remember his presentation and his visit to the US. And please give him our salams and our prayers for continued good health. We will be having question and answer session afterwards, but we do have Nasir Qadri. I don't know if he can, if there's any problems in hearing him, we'll have to probably get him on the audio. But Brother Nasir Qadri is a well-known Kashmiri activist in Pakistan. He's a lawyer of human rights from the Indian occupied Kashmir, now working in Islamabad. He's pursuing his PhD in the law of armed conflict. He also heads the Islamabad-based international advocacy group called Legal Forum for Kashmir, LFK. Mr. Qadri, before coming to Islamabad, has been an executive member of High Court Bar Association in the capital city of Kashmir. So, Brother Nasir Qadri, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay. Okay, mashallah. Can you see my video as well?
We don't see your image, but your voice is clear to me here. Are you speaking? We can't hear your voice now. It was good right at the beginning. You could probably call on my phone, maybe, and I can people may be able to speak, listen to you from there. We are having difficulty in hearing you. We are not able to hear him. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Let me check with others if they can hear you. Brother Emthiaz, can you hear him?
Yes, we can hear him. You can talk.
Okay, go ahead and speak on the phone. You're on voice on the speaker phone now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Okay, first of all, thank you, World Kashmir Awareness Forum and ICNA for inviting me today on the World Human Rights Day. And then when the UN has selected the theme of equality, I don't know how whatever fascist Modi is doing with the minorities in India and the horrendous acts which his army is perpetrating in occupied Kashmir. I mean, the soul of the legal philosophers, like from Plato to Blackstone, who have advocated equality or conceptualized it, will be restless. So the topic was timely, a very good topic, but Mirza Sahib Beg has thoroughly discussed and he has critically evaluated. I'll skip a few parts to avoid the repetition. So while Kashmir remains, in terms of international legality, a dispute between India and Pakistan, the invisibilization of the internal Kashmiri dynamics entails in an overemphasis on the legality, which becomes part of the narrative violence Kashmiri on the daily basis, which Kashmiris face. Drawing on my experience of working with Kashmir, working within the Kashmir, again as a state-driven narrative violence, I'll seek to delineate how the government of India used Kashmir as a laboratory to test black laws, such as this Unlawful Prevention Act and the Public Safety Act, and not only these laws, but the other, even the martial laws such as the Armies Act 1950 or Border Security Act or Central Reserve Police Act 1949, which govern the functioning of the Indian Armed Force while deployed on the counter-insurgency duties. So these laws and the Supreme Court judgments which were rendered under them provides that the military courts can try all the acts of military indiscipline and all crimes committed by the armed personnel with both on and off the duty through closed doors court-martial proceedings initiated at the option of these military authorities. The question of the power, the question of police power to register criminal complaints against the armed force, it's currently being litigated in the Supreme Court of India, and the police are injected from filing any such complaints in the interim. And now, when you try these cases before the courts, like the jurisdiction of the civilian courts over the crimes by the military persons is further proscribed through the legal immunity provisions of the extraordinary laws, which Mirza has mentioned as Armed Force Special Powers Act. In Kashmir, unlike the Palestinian occupied territories, crimes by the both combatants and the civilians committed against the armed force. Here, skipping the what UAPA is or how it has failed the constitutional test, because there is a lot has been written on these UAPA. I see the majority goes against the laws, that it's a stringent black law. I have just these anti-terror legislations developed the concept of the hyperlegality. Like what hyperlegality to describe the structural and the permanent shift from a liberal mode of governance in which the emergency is conceived and the withdrawal of the laws and the institutions of temporary rule by the executive power without the judicial and or the legislative check in a response to a specific crisis. I'll cite a few cases. Even Mirza has cited the Yasin's case or Dr. Qasim Fakhtu's case. Let me first discuss this hyperlegality. What hyperlegality is characterized not by the suspension of law, but rather by the development of complex and multiple bodies of the legal authority, special venues and bureaucratic classifications involving a predictive quality based on profiling individuals on the basis of who they are and what they are likely to do. So the situation in the Kashmir, the systems of the criminal justice system, or these preventive detentions, the substantive laws and these preventive detentions, which Mirza has discussed, Article 22 of Constitution, they operate not as a separate system, but contingently and concurrently, such that multiple and repeated police complaints or criminal cases from the basis of police dossiers and executive detentions. Here I'll cite the Masarat Alam's case. I was a lawyer of Masarat before coming to Islamabad. He has served some 38 detention, and all those detention were quashed. Can you hear me, Dr. Mir?
Yes, we can.
Okay. In one of his detention, the grounds urged by the executive, the executive or the detaining authority was that Mr. Masarat, you are born you are born with anti-India sentiments. Hence, your detention is imperative. Like, this is crazy. Like, Americans couldn't call Osama a born terrorist, from the childhood. So this is how this hyper-legality goes on. Before this amendment in 2019, this UAP amendment, UAP was already there. The stringent law and the special offense in which it was not easy to be bailed out. And now this NIA thing, which has haunted the freedom-loving peoples or the civilian populations. The first case in Kashmir was the case of Ghulam Ahmad Bhatt, the first case of NIA, and he was a senior member of Tehreek-e-Hurriyat, and then he is again a lawyer. He has pursued his LLM from Netherlands, and he is presently in Tihar, the first case of this NIA and the UAPA. Mr. Bhatt has engaged the Ramlik Malani in his case. I remember because I was there in New Delhi. He argued his bail for 7 years before Delhi High Court. And when Ramjesh Malani was a sitting MP, a member of parliament, in one of the hearings, when he was arguing his bail, the sitting judge made an observation, Mr. Malani, please use your good offices other than arguing in a court. So this is how things work in Kashmir. Again, I'll skip what the data is. The Indian National Crime Record Bureau, which Mirza said that the prosecution is not even a 1%. In 2019, that from 2016 to 2009, the conviction there was only 2.2% conviction rate. Nearly 11% cases were closed by the police for the lack of evidence. And then after 15 or 20 years, even then the media, whatever they did with the media personals. So these, we have to focus much on whatever they did and the counter means. Here, by this, I mean the logic which these India claim of Kashmir. It necessitates a concerned attempt at obfuscating the basic reality. By now, the repression in Kashmir has evolved. No longer, it has evolved in no longer which seeks to apply itself by the military means alone. So we have to work on as Mirza said, the mass mobilization against these things, the mobilization outside Kashmir, the diaspora has role, and simply the counter narratives, building the narratives, like narratives, or simply when it comes to Indian part, they work on this narrative building, or simply multiple strands of the propaganda. Like some of it is complex in working or deployed in aid of that repression, and to maintain the status quo. The way these works on the ground presents a clear indication of the continuing Indian policy in Kashmir, a reality of a repression regardless of any talk or of engaging with the people of Kashmir. Now, with all this, if I sum up, one could argue that any kind of a change must be first reflected on the ground, in how the Indian state might alter its narrative. But for now, and for the foreseeable future, this stridency or the cacophony and the sheer violence of these Indian narratives suggests that no positive change will be forthcoming unless a mass mobilization. And one more thing, somebody said that there are no laws when it is an occupation. There are laws, not these, but there are laws of occupation. And then there is the actions which can be legitimate. We have to work on these. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nasir Qadri. Excellent presentation. What you really said here is that we, like Mirza Sahib Beg, the pressure has come from outside. Kashmiris are doing as much as they can, given the circumstances where you can't even go out and 3 or 4 people cannot get together without military or police catching them or killing them. So I think the onus is on the Western countries that are free, but more importantly on the people and leadership in the United States, including the White House and the State Department and Congress. This event, by the way, is being recorded, and those people that were not able to attend today's event will be able to send a copy of that to them, and we'll share it on our website, kashmirawareness.org. At the same time, we'll also like to bring one more speaker who we found out just this morning that he was able to help us out, particularly when Nasir Qadri said that any change, any improvement in human rights conditions must be reflected on the ground, on the people and the land where they come from, where they're living. And this next speaker, luckily, happens to be one who is an intellectual, a social and a scientist, and he has a heart of gold. And it is Dr. Emthiaz Khan. He is a member of the board of World Kashmir Awareness Forum. He is professor of microbiology, immunology, and tropical medicine at George Washington University. He can tell us exactly about what's happening in Kashmir after what we heard from the 2 eminent lawyers. So Dr. Emthiaz Khan, please, you have about 10 minutes and then you'll be able to participate in Q&A. We'll be finishing this session at 11:30. So thank you for joining us, and welcome back.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mir, and very kind of you for providing me this opportunity. I was in Kashmir last week. I came just a few days ago. And I have been I've been visiting Kashmir as last I was in 2018, and colonization and militarization is a common thing there that happens. But what is going on, you have to go there to witness. A radical is the understatement, changes. There, everything is going under nefarious designs planned by Indian government to change the demographic character of Kashmir. And it is, as I said, it is being done in a planned manner. And there are various steps which are being implemented. And I will try to go one by one how they are doing it. When I went from Delhi to Kashmir, I was really confused because the plane was full. This usually November, and all of the Kashmiris will know it, is a lean season where you don't have much tourist traffic to Srinagar because things get cold and there is not much of snow and the skiing traffic is not all there. But the plane was full with Hindus who had, because how I could recognize, because they had this religious mark on their forehead. And when I reached Kashmir, there were other flights, and the airport, I could hardly get my luggage because there was no COVID restriction. You had to get on another person to basically pick up your luggage. And I went outside. I told the driver who had come to pick me up what is going on, and what he told me, what they have discovered a river where it has some religious connection for Hindus, and they have come to take a holy dip in there. Now, what this is going on, when I talk to people, it is happening in a planned manner. They were under one pretext or other placing an idol somewhere saying that it has a religious connection. They want to bring Hindus from outside to the state so that the whole year you have these non-Kashmiris come in. It is the same strategy which they applied few years ago when Amarnath Yatra was used to be for 15 days. They extended it to 1 month and now 2 months, and now they want to do throughout the year. The strategy is to bring more and more Hindus. Basically, ultimately, they want to have permanent settlements there so that they can reside there, and under the religious pretext, basically change the demographic of the state. Second thing is that de-Islamization of Kashmir. What they are doing, they are renaming the streets in Kashmir, which were under Sufis, saints, or so on, and putting the names of Hindu fundamentals, RSS leaders. They are closing the mosques, like the biggest mosque, the Jamia Masjid. We didn't have prayers since years. And they are occupying the lands so that they can use it under for their own purposes, so that they can settle these Hindu population there. Now, another thing what they are doing, they are seeing to it that the economy is shattered. Now, Kashmir has agriculture, still a lot of orchards. Hundreds and thousands of canals or acres of land have been taken by the army under one pretext or other. So they deprive Kashmiris of their livelihood. There is enforced unemployment. Since last 12 to 14 years, no doctors, no dental surgeons have been appointed, so that the youth are driven to unemployment. They are frustrated, and they have also infused drugs into the system. So they are drug addicts, so that the Kashmiris basically are economically shattered, and their youth are driven to the basic disaster. Employees are under constant stress. I went to hospitals, and doctors are working under duress. There are no medicines. And somebody commented that if anybody in Kashmir these days is saved, it is by the will of Allah, but not by the medicine, because it is not available. The COVID standards are not maintained. People are not wearing masks. There are these hundreds and thousands of tourists residing in the hotels, and they have no masks. People are brushing with each other. And what could happen, God forbid, could be nothing short of disaster. And it is man-made disaster, which Indian government wants to impose. The people are being fired. The schools have been attacked. Every other day, 4 to 5 teachers have been dismissed, terminated from the services, under the pretext they were indulging in anti-national activities. Take away business from them, take away employment from them, and drive them to the wall, so that they are reduced to third-class citizens. If you walk into the Secretariat of Jammu and Kashmir, all the top officials are from Hindus from India, so that they can implement their designs. Kashmiris, it is a planned manner to put Kashmiris in ghettos, take away their land, take away their employment, and so that they are reduced to third-class citizens. Then there is, I read a document by Yashwant Sinha, former foreign minister of India, he said that he talked to one top level official and he said there is the plan in Kashmir is the doctrine of force. It is not doctrine of force, no, it is doctrine of repression. Under a slight pretext, if they find that somebody is expressing, some individual Kashmiri is expressing resentment, they put him in jail. They harass his family, and his family is put into jail so that there is no voice. Basically, shut them up, change the demographic of Kashmir, bring in the Hindu population, and then they are throwing crumbs at people. There is no money for employment, but they are offering some few self-serving businessmen. If they toe the BJP line, we will give you loans for construction of discotheques, construction of hotels, construction of cinema halls, so that whole Kashmiri culture is invaded and they change the whole situation. This is being done in pre-planned manner. De-Islamization, bring in the Hindu culture, economically shatter the Kashmiris, and corrupt dumb people who are toeing in the line. And in this regard, I want to, there are young people I met, they are crying. What is happening to the Kashmir? We are losing our identity. But the problem is, all the Hurriyat leadership is in jail. They have left no means to express themselves. Kashmir right up is a tinderbox. And international community has to take note of it. How far the youth, that silent majority who have been throttled, who are being repressed, when they reach point of no return, what measures will they take to fight for their rights? This is a food for thought of the international community. If they take extreme steps, who is to be blamed? The thing is, you just raise a voice, you are behind the jail. There is no leadership. All the leadership is behind the bars. The leadership they are encouraging is people like Farooq Abdullah, Mahbooba Mufti. Actually, they issue statements which are sort of sympathetic to the people of Kashmir. But mind you, this is a ruse. They want to appear they are sympathetic, but they are in cahoots with the government. So tomorrow, Indian government has to sign some sort of a deal. They will do with them, which will be of their interests. My time is only 10 minutes. I can speak volumes about what is going on in Kashmir, how they have changed the character of Kashmir. You walk on the streets of Kashmir, you will find fundamentalist Hindus walking on the streets of Kashmir, occupying the hotels, restaurants, and so on and so forth. And the idea is to permanently settle them there to change the democratic character. In medical college and engineering colleges, they say that they will have a national competition so that they can get students from outside India. And Kashmiri youth will be deprived of those sole opportunities also. We are talking of, I heard the speaker after speaker, legal experts talking about laws and everything. What kind of laws are we defending in? There is a state of lawlessness. How do you define laws in the state of lawlessness? Like I said, it is not I visited Kashmir after 30 years. Last I visited Kashmir was 2018. I saw a different Kashmir altogether. I saw frustrated youth. I saw lack of leadership. I saw change in demography. And India is basically implementing what their nefarious designs. The double doctrine is being implemented every day. The land is being taken, the jobs are being taken, People are deprived of their fundamental rights. There is no way of expression. And one day this tinderbox will explode and we will reach point of no return, and for which international community is responsible for this nightmare, and there will be no recourse in future. And that's what we have to go into. We can talk about these laws and draconian laws and so on and so forth, international community. But the question is, what is going on the ground? How we deal with that? Do we have a strategy to deal with that? And unless and until we have that, I don't think how things will work.
Thank you, Doctor.
I believe Dr. Mir is, and I have to stop.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Emthiaz Khan. I know few people who can speak so passionately about Kashmir, because we know you're on fire. Your emotions are on fire. This is not happening only in Kashmir, which is the darkest spot. It's like a dead in the night kind of a situation there. But I was listening to the radio and the news channels in India, that India in its heart is not any far back compared to Kashmir, because this darkness is going to spread over India, because they don't have doctors there. They are dying. COVID killed over 1 million people. And with Kashmir, they have experimented, but this darkness does not stay within Kashmir. It will come to, cause them trouble in their own country. What you described is an apartheid. I have considered Kashmir as a big gulag of the former Soviet Union. And the infamous Tihar jail in Delhi has become a dumping ground, the dungeons for Kashmiri human rights activists and political leaders. And the world, including where we are sitting, does nothing about it. They see nothing, they hear nothing. And unless we awaken the Western world and the Middle East to the plight of Kashmiris, things may not change, but we'll continue to struggle for our freedom. It's basically a do or die situation for Kashmiris. So we have just a few minutes left. We would now pose the first question. And the question is about Khurram Parvez. How does the arrest of Khurram Parvez showcase the greater human rights abuses happening in Kashmir? What are the key takeaways from his arrest? I would put this question to the two prominent lawyers, Mirza Saibeg, if you are still here, and also ask Brother Nasir Qadri to speak to this. We can probably have a minute each. Mirza Saab, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello? Rami Saab? Okay.
I don't believe he's there.
Okay, he's not there. Okay, we can ask the same question, that is the Khurram Parvez's arrest and taking him away. How about Nasir Qadri? Can you address that issue, that question?
He's also gone. He's no longer here. The only people here is myself, you, and Dr. Emthiaz right now.
Okay. I guess then we leave that question. We're continuing at the WKA and many other Kashmiri diaspora organizations. There's constant communication on social media and putting pressure on. Okay. Okay. Walaikum salam.
Can you hear me? I'm sorry, there's some problem in Streamline.
Okay. Did you?
Okay. Okay.
Can
I
you
heard the question.
address the first question? That
Okay.
is
Yes.
the arrest of Khurram Parvez. What is, tell us a little bit about it, and what is the takeaway from his arrest? What does it tell Kashmiris what our future is?
It's not about only about the Khurram Parvez. It's about all the Kashmiri. It's about the equality of the.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
And now I can. You're breaking up here and there.
Okay. It's not only about the case of the Khurram Parvez. It's about all the Kashmiris. Like there is no. I mean, the Kashmir is not a safer zone, and these stringent laws, nobody is safe. I mean, the NIA or the law, it has told everyone's life. It's not about the and not this Khurram Parvez. If you see the Khurram's case in 2016, Khurram was detained just for doing just for addressing the UNHRC session. And now, I believe, as a lawyer, when they extrajudicially murdered some innocent these in Hyderpora, they fear that Khurram or any other activist from his organization may report or record the extrajudicial killing, and then for this reason he was detained. I mean, simply, it's a crazy thing. Okay. Nobody is safe under this Modi's regime, and about these laws, these stringent black laws.
Okay, well, thank you on that. I guess that makes sense. I think they take all these preventive measures, like Dr. Emthiaz Khan said. They have a plan. They have a plan of wiping out Kashmiri population and converting them to Hinduism, or taking away whatever rights they have, and eventually, convert it back to how Kashmir was approximately 600-700 years ago. Before the change occurred in the Kashmiri society. The next question we have is, Indian forces have been suppressing Kashmiris for many years. How has this law historically been used by India to silence those that pose a threat to their power and influence? I guess that was well addressed by both lawyers, and I think that probably we can move on. The last question is, I think we have a minute or two. Our hope is in having these discussions to inform the international community about what's taking place in Indian occupied Kashmir. What are the ways international community can help Kashmiris as they continue to face human rights abuses from Indian forces? I guess Dr. Emthiaz Khan, you can probably take a minute, and we see Ms. Asai Beg here, if you want to give an overall view of that. So 1 minute for each.
Sure. Sure. All right, I can go ahead. I was trying to speak earlier, but I don't know if you could hear me that time.
No.
So I think just very briefly, the earlier question about UAPA and Khurram Parvez's arrest. See, the state has charged Khurram with allegedly terror funding and conspiracy, but there's no evidence that has been given for anything in this. And this is the nature of the UAPA. You don't need to give evidence. You can only accuse a person, and they can be jailed for many, many months, many days before a hearing even takes place. The object over here is not just the detention of Khurram, or not just the detention of one person. The object is to have a chilling effect that you don't know what can be used against you. So stay in line. Don't speak. Don't talk. Don't dissent. Don't raise your voice. Because the moment you say something, maybe it might be taken out of context. Now, tomorrow, even if it is established that the people who are in jail right now, many of the people, in fact, just yesterday, one of the people who had been detained, Sudha Bharadwaj, she's an Indian activist who had been detained under UAPA. She was released just yesterday from jail. So eventually, most of the people who are in jail under UAPA, they will get released. But the number of years they will spend in jail, it breaks their will. The intention of the state is that it will break their will. It makes them weaker. And in many cases, when people are in jail for 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, you go inside as a young man and you come out very old, where the spirit has been battered so much that it becomes much harder for people to mobilize, and the general population is sent a signal that the moment you raise your voice, this will be done to you, and we don't need to take permission from anyone. We don't need to abide by international norms and regulations. We'll do what we want. So that is the message that has to be that is being sent out over here. But specifically on what can the international community do, look, the international community has every resource at its disposal. You can mobilize at different levels based on where you are coming from. If you are an individual, you can speak to your local MPs. You can mobilize in your local place of worship, whether that's a mosque, a church, or from any religion. You can mobilize over there, speak at least on human grounds about what is truly a human suffering. And then you can mobilize from political perspective as well about what actually the dispute is about. Because even if human rights violations stop in Kashmir, the issue of Kashmir is not resolved. So Kashmir is not just a human rights issue, but of course, within the realm of our political dispute, human rights are also being violated. But the fundamental demand in Kashmir, whether India agrees with it or not, the fundamental demand is one of freedom. And Kashmiris are not asking freedom because human rights are being violated. It is because Kashmiris ask for freedom, that's why human rights get violated. So it is a cycle that's taking place over there. And the international community has to highlight this at multiple levels. If you are a human rights organization, you can attack it from a human rights perspective. If you are a feminist LGBTQ organization, you can attack it from that perspective also. Because when mass oppression takes place, when mass punishment takes place, it does not discriminate between someone who's a Muslim or a Hindu or a LGBTQ identity or someone who's a woman. Every Kashmiri is oppressed in different forms. Of course, the level of oppression for Muslims and the level of oppression for Hindus is different. But the moment even Kashmiri Hindus who have supported the movement of independence, the moment they also speak up, they also face a backlash. So the state will come for anyone who is dissenting. And even Indian activists right now, Sudha Bharadwaj, Arun Ferreira, many of the other people who are in jail, who have all raised their voice against what the Indian government has done, they are in jail despite their Hindu identity. But the level of violence which is going to be approved against a Kashmiri Muslim and the level of violence which is going to be approved against an Indian Hindu is going to be different. Because the identity of Muslims right now, it has become politically advantageous to be violent against this identity. So we are dealing with multiple oppressions, and based on whatever background you come from, you can intervene and raise awareness and mobilize most of all. But where we need most support from international communities is at least on financial capacity building. So we have students who come out from Kashmir, you can support them to advocate their causes, you can give them safe spaces, or you can enable scholarships for them. We have lawyers, doctors, engineers, all people coming, and they have to be supported. On the ground, there are media organizations which have completely been muzzled out. The only way media organizations can function is through advertising, and the state has completely curbed all avenues for them. So they are also struggling. You can support them, give them opportunities in your respective medias. If there are people who are from a different, for example, in the UK, there are political groups which run media platforms which are sympathetic to movements of self-determination and human rights against human rights violations. They can be given space to publish, and they can be shown a path which helps them sustain their movements and their struggles. So there are multiple levels at which international community can come in. And finally, if you are actually at the international level where you have access to international institutions like the United Nations, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or international bodies, if you have access to major political actors in the US political arena, in the UK political arena, you have to, it is mandatory for you to utilize whatever resources you have. And at the smallest level, if you are just an individual, just a student, just a young person, then at the least you do is you share these messages on social media. At least it reaches your immediate network. So at multiple levels, the international community, as well as people who are in the diaspora, they can intervene and they can come in to support, to increase the amplification. They can amplify what is going on, and they can protect voices from the ground by giving them safe spaces to take their struggle forward in their own narrative.
Thank you so much. We're running up. We're out of time now. I just wanted to say that our hope in having these discussions is to inform the international community about what is taking place in Indian occupied Kashmir. And our speakers made an excellent case for that. What are the ways the international community can help Kashmiris? is by using the social media, by speaking about human rights, and what I have felt in the last many years in this media here, the mainstream media, and from the ruling party and the non-ruling parties all alike, and even the intellectuals, is there's such a deafening silence. How can this civilized nation, or civilized nations like the U.S. elsewhere, our media experts, how can they be so quiet about it? There is usually one article in Washington Post or one article in New York Times, occasionally when things like arrest of Khurram Parvez occurs, and there is hardly anything happening when they have the targeted killings in Kashmir. So we need to request the American media to please stand with us, stand with the rights of Kashmiris, so we can be number one, have our freedom, have the self-determination conducted, plebiscite in Kashmir, and also support the people. We also like to ask the Kashmiris, as Mirza Saib Beg said, that we do need to help our students who want to come out and study abroad, so they can make their lives better, they can save their families. So we need to help the educational these programs. It doesn't take a whole lot to support these students, and many times they get with little help, it can go a long ways. With all that said, please do support in whatever way you can this and other Kashmiri organizations within the diaspora. Visit KashmirAwareness.org, the YouTube, the Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and let's push forward for regaining our political and human rights.
Can I make a short comment, Dr. Mir?
Yes, please do.
So unless and until there are economic sanctions imposed on India, which will hurt them economically, India will not budge. When there was a letter written by senators from United States, Indian foreign ministers discounted that said it is a routine manner, we should not take it seriously. And I agree with Mirza Saab, we should not make it just a human rights issue. Human rights violations will continue in Kashmir till right of self-determination is given to the people of Kashmir. We have to make it very clear. We have not to make it just a human rights issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thanks all. God bless. Be safe, and we'll until the next time. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.